This week our topic is on designing effectiveness-based information systems, meaning you have a way to collect data that's meaningful, that will provide some feedback to you about how the program is working, and then also give you the data that you need for the final or summative type of evaluation. I've asked you to skim this week's title or headings in the chapter because the examples go into so much detail about example that's probably not relevant to most or maybe even all of you. So I just want to highlight some of the takeaways in this chapter in terms of the headings and what they mean for you, maybe provide some better examples, and also couple that with the reading that you have this week about looking at the actual process of the actual implementation plan that you have. So designing a data collection system, there are 5 steps discussed in this chapter. Consider the evaluation context of data collection and aggregation. So what is the context of that evaluation? What purpose does it serve inside of that particular question or hypothesis that you had? And does the hypothesis match up with the data collection method you're having? In other words, will that data collection method give you the answer you need regarding the hypothesis and how that will be aggregated? Why is the evaluation being planned at all? And most of us, there's some sort of money or some sort of a stakeholder group that needs to know the responses to that. Who will be using the evaluation? Is it going back to the program leaders? Is it for the stakeholders? Is it for funders? And in most cases, it's all of the above. So those are the kinds of things. Consider the evaluation context. What do all potential users expect to learn from it? So if you know that what the outcome is, who will be using that evaluation, are you going to be collecting the data that is necessary to give them the answers to their particular questions or things they're wondering about? And will they then have what they expected from your evaluation? The central question then is what happened as a result of a particular intervention strategy that would not have happened in the absence of this program? That is a really reflective question. Maybe that should have been the most important thing here is number 1, a central question. What happened as a result? Did you avoid some consequence that you were trying to avoid that was part of your narrative for even establishing the program? So if you went away, would it matter? That's another way to look at that. So what is the context? If I went away, this consequence would have happened or potentially could have happened. All right, the second part in that chapter, identify the programmatic questions to be answered. And what we're looking at here is, does the program hypothesis appear to be correct? Did our theory or our understanding about if-then take place? And so that's the ultimate question that we're answering. We're collecting data on that, and we're going to do some sort of analysis to decide if our hypothesis was correct, or is there something else going on that we should have done? Are the clients, or in this case, the participants, actually improving, or is there some behavioral change taking place, resulting in some sort of long-term attitudinal or skill change in their life, depending on what the actual program is? If so, will we be able to explain why? Does that data that we collected give us enough information for why? And that kind of goes back to how did we collect the data? Did we use a survey method where we got some responses, but we don't have the how come or the why is that? That would maybe be gathered through some sort of qualitative process or observations or some of the other methods that you have at your disposal. And of course, one of them being, all of them falling into either the quantitative or qualitative camp. So if so, will we be able to explain why? If not, we'll be able to explain why not. Those are all really important things that usually stakeholders, funders want to know about in terms of if they're spending money on a program. All right, the third thing discussed here as the data collection system steps are identifying the data elements needed. So what is the absolute minimum we must know about the inputs, throughputs, outputs, and outcomes? And that means the reason they discuss the minimum is because all of these things cost money. And so you don't want to present the, this giant pie in the sky thing and then get whittled down, but you don't really know what your minimum is that you need to do the evaluation. So what is the absolute minimum that you must have? And what do we need to know about the client or participant demographics to be able to answer the questions with ethnic and other special populations? So that's just asking you to say, think critically about whether or not you're going to need that type of data. Do I need to know their gender? Do I need to know their age? Do I need to know their socioeconomic status? Do I need to know maybe where they live as it relates to socioeconomic status or some other geographical feature that is important to the particular program or intervention that you have? Oftentimes people forget to put these sort of things on a survey or on some sort of data collection, and then somebody comes back and says, but do we know this? How old were they? What gender were they? Did they fall into this ethnic group? And so those are the kinds of things that give us more information about the type of intervention we have and maybe the ways to improve, change it, and to meet the outcomes moving forward. And that's actually something discussed in the reading this week and that I've added in instead of the text. Fourth step, develop a strategy for analysis. In some ways, this has almost got to be first, because if you don't know what it is that you want in the end, you probably won't collect the right type of data that will lend itself to that type of analysis. Having said that, it is fourth because we've talked about that and it's leading up to it. But these five, they call them steps. They're almost laterals instead of being almost in a step by step. It's like all of these things have to be considered. But develop a strategy for your analysis. How can the data be displayed in order to be sure that all users will be able to understand what is happening in the program from their particular perspective? And so if you have collected the data, you've run an analysis that's meaningful to answer the questions, how can we then make sure that that data then is presentable to those stakeholders who are looking at that and understand what's happening in the program? An important step, step four, and oftentimes when I read a proposal for a thesis or a dissertation or even a funding proposal, people are missing how they are going to collect that data to answer the question. Or they're just thinking, I'm just going to grab a bunch of descriptive things, but they're trying to make a prediction, and so they don't collect enough data to really lend themselves into some sort of regression model for making predictions and that kind of thing. So this is an important, really important step, oftentimes missed in a proposal. Prepare for the format for monthly reports. If this is a program that is part of a community or a county or state program or even federal programs, I have to prepare for USDA a format, not monthly reports, but every 6-month reports. Know what those look like and understand what the format is that's being expected by the stakeholders. Who will get these monthly reports? What level of understanding do they need about statistics? What is it that they're requiring? What do they need to know? And what is the best way to display that information? More and more people are really wanting to see graphical displays, which we'll talk about moving forward, but it just gives them a lot of information in a quicker way than actually reading across the text. So you see a lot of infographics. In fact, infographics being used to present entire reports where we used to have narrative. And so this is a way in the 21st century that people want to gather or collect or understand data, and then they'll come and ask questions. But what is the best way to display this information? That has a lot to do with who the stakeholders are who will be looking at it. All right, now this is a tiny, man, this got really small, types of evaluations. It's taken right from your text. But they go through the 5 general types of evaluation. I want to highlight these because, again, I had you skim this chapter. Maybe this is a place that you should take out your highlighter and mark. But these are the types of evaluation, and I think this is the most important part, sans their example that they have in this chapter for takeaways. But you're looking at the effort. You're looking at effort measurements. How much is concentrated exclusively with documenting the characteristics of the program participants, quantity and activity that takes place in that program. In other words, how engaged were the participants? Measuring that effort. The cost efficiency, this is another thing that's going to be measured, and oftentimes not necessarily by the participants unless they're paying for the service, but by the stakeholder, the person's funding that particular initiative. And they will know cost per unit and cost for achieving each output so they can make some better data-driven types of decisions. Outcome evaluations obviously examine whether or not you achieved it, and that feeds back into, well, we achieved it, but at what cost? If it's a minimal cost and the consequences of you not doing it actually cost more, then that is a really important metric to have. The fourth bullet there, cost effectiveness evaluation, that's exactly what I just talked about, the cost per successful outcome. And then finally, impact evaluation is concerned with the extent to which the community needs, as determined by the planning process, have been met by the program. And I think it was a couple weeks ago, we talked about whether those impacts are measured as initial, intermediate, or kind of that long-term impact of what you're really hoping and striving for is some sort of behavior change. So this is an important takeaway, the types of evaluation. So when you're considering your questions, do I need to use just one type of evaluation to make a decision, or do I need to apply more than one to this particular question that I'm interested in, or this particular outcome or objective that I'm interested in? Then two very important things that they talk about in table or figure 9.2, which I felt like they glossed over, but are really important in terms of the reading this week. Formative and summative evaluation. Now, those of you who are formal educators are very aware of what this means. Formative evaluation means that we oftentimes aren't doing it for grades. We are looking at it in terms of feedback back to our instruction to make it more effective for our students. And so formative evaluation is just the same. It's like a formative assessment where we're doing basically a temperature check along the way to see if we are in what is being described as the way the program is supposed to be implemented, and if not, make some change. So they make a note here. It is conducted during the actual operation of the program and uses data gathered during that cycle. And you can make changes within this part of doing this formative evaluation. Provides information during that implementation to determine to extent which the program is being implemented according to the design. Answers questions about the program implementation, focuses on the process objectives. This is key, and this is what is talked about in your reading. You focus on the process. Are we actually conducting the program in the way that it was designed? Because if it's not, and especially if it's being conducted in multiple sites by different individuals who are conducting the program, you have introduced so many different variables that when you do the actual summative evaluation, you can't really decide, was it the person? Was it the location? Was it the program that was was it the duration? The process has been tweaked in such a way as to have a bunch of apple, oranges, kumquats, and kiwis and bananas that are in the mix as variables, and you can't really focus on, was it this actual program that made this successful? So that's really important piece of formative evaluation, is just to draw back and make sure that you are implementing the program as it was designed so you can have a more accurate measurement. Enables the manager to determine then whether the modifications should be made to a program operation even before the program has completed its first year. So this formative piece is what I'm focusing on this week. Summative evaluation is the subject essentially of 3 weeks in this course. But essentially, it's drawing the differences here between the two. It's carried out either at the end of the program cycle component. It provides the assessment of the program accomplishments, and it focuses on the outcome objectives that then hopefully are turned into these types of impacts that we are looking for. Big takeaway here on table 9.2, the types of evaluation, so I wanted to highlight that. Evaluation types then within the logic model. This is figure 9.2, fit of the 5 types of evaluation. They're just giving you an example where you would use the effort type evaluation on input. Do we have enough staff hours that are being put into this? Do we have effort in terms of the actual dollars coming in? Looking at your inputs and evaluating effort. Looking at the process and evaluating effort. And to me, this is I'll talk about this on the next slide, but this is the critical piece here, that the process is being implemented and this is being evaluated step by step throughout the program. Outputs, oftentimes we're looking for the efficiency. We might also look at effort here, and then certainly the outcome. Then let me go back here. Outputs, efficiency, let's say that it's a training or an educational program. Has it been implemented as designed, and is it as efficient as it should be as designed? So you're looking at these two really closely here in terms of the formative part of the evaluation that you might do throughout the program as it's moving along. And then in outcomes, the types of evaluation we would use are outcome evaluation and cost effectiveness. You're going to say, we hit our mark, we moved the needle by 1 point or 10%, but then you have to decide, was it worth the cost that you had for that program implementation? Was it worth the 10% that you moved the needle on for that particular problem? And then impact, hopefully you have these, and if you don't, it's back to the drawing board about consequences that were avoided, the major impact that you made, the amount of income a person's had was increased by 10 or 20%, even though the program only cost us this much. You really want to have those impact statements written in, and I'll come back 3 weeks from now, I think, and talk about a little bit more about writing those impact statements. So that's how you fit the 5 types of evaluation within the phases of the logic model. And then I want to highlight this one right here, process, as it relates to this week's reading, because the service tasks, the methods of intervention, is everything being conducted in a way? And if it's not, if this is manipulated in any way outside of what was designed, then we don't really know if our program design is what's leading to the achievement or lack of achievement in the outcomes, and therefore we may or may not have any impact statements. So that's a little bit of an overview for this week. As always, if you have any questions about the content, I hope that this has helped a little bit more than kind of going into their example about how it would look and how it would be worked out or implemented within the programs that you are designing.